the primary vote for the major parties is dropping over time. Australians are voting increasingly beyond the two-party binary for those minor and micro-party candidates and independents. And our political system should be able to hold those candidates and those representatives in a way that is reflective of the public sentiment, not just of a political system that was designed ages ago when those two parties had stronger foothold in
really
the public.
dominant.
One for Mum, one for Dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared.
The Treasurer knows. I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains big economic issues in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and this week we're looking at some electoral reforms coming up and what we might do about them.
The way federal election campaigns are conducted could soon change.
The rich have tended to have a disproportionate sway on politics.
The annual release of data showing who funds Australia's political parties raises more questions than it answers.
The political parties only have to disclose how much money they've received if the amount is over about $14,000.
To introduce radical reforms which could see caps on political donations.
Surely voters have a right to know who's bankrolled a candidate or party before casting their vote.
Australians want to see a level playing field, transparency and truth, not big money affecting the outcomes of elections and policies.
Well, just once a year we get to see who is donating to political parties, and every year it's a wash, with big corporates and big polluters donating big money to the big parties.
The government is understood to support the recommendation.
The Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters released its interim report into the last federal election recently, which, among other things, considers election spending and donation caps, amongst a range of other reforms. Now, given we just had a federal election where integrity was at the heart of the big issues that voters care about, that might sound sensible on the face of it. But when you drill down and consider the financial advantages that incumbent MPs have, thanks to public funding and entitlements, it's really important that any reforms are structured to ensure a fair fight between incumbents and challengers come election time. And our research shows that incumbents have huge advantages. To help dig into the detail, I'm talking to Bill Brown, Director of the Democracy and Accountability Program at the Australia Institute, and Liz Morrison, Researcher at the Australia Institute and co-author of the Advantages of Incumbency report together with Bill. G'day, Bill. G'day, Liz.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Ed.
Bill, I want to start with the what we will call the JSCAM report, the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters. Can you tell us a little bit about JSCAM and what it does and why every election it looks into the previous election?
Sure thing. So JSCAM is a parliamentary committee made up of MPs from the lower house and senators. It's a standing committee, so it appears again after each election. And one of its kind of standing orders of business is that it always reviews the last election. It's chaired by Kate Thwaites, a Labor MP, but it has representatives from the major parties and the Greens and an independent, Kate Cheney. So we hear a great number of voices from it. And as is often the case with these election reviews, they take a long time coming to their conclusions because they cover a wide range of issues. And as you hinted by the fact that this is an interim report, we haven't even heard the last from them on some of the policy reforms that they're considering.
But the kinds of things that they look into is generally, I guess, did anything go wrong with the last election and how can we improve things for next time round? That's always kind of the drive of what they're after, right?
That's right, yeah. They'll look at the performance of the last election, they'll grill the AEC, the Electoral Commission, over any irregularities, but they've also got an eye to how they'd like the rules of the game to apply to the next election.
And so tell me, what are some of the key things that came out of this interim report?
We've seen a big focus on political finance generally in this report. So very welcome proposals to make donations more transparent, to lower the disclosure threshold from over $15,000 to $1,000, and to introduce what they call real-time disclosure. So we actually find out about donations as they're coming in, not waiting up to 18 months afterwards.
Which is the case now.
Exactly.
So, yeah, just a reminder to everyone listening, though we do have public disclosure of donations, often you don't find out about it until well after, like more than a year after the actual election has occurred, which is problematic.
Exactly. They've also turned their mind this time to questions about donation and spending caps. So inspired by concerns about corporate influence in politics, including Clive Palmer's massive spending campaigns at the last 2 federal elections, they've quite understandably asked questions about how much influence money has on our democracy and how you might limit that influence.
But it's not just that the information is late. Much of it is actually hidden from the public.
For the Labor Party, it was about 55%, and for the Liberal Party in their worst years was up to sort of like 65%, where we actually didn't know where the money was coming from.
So, as we said, on the face of it, that sounds very sensible. We don't want kind of one billionaire coming in and, just being able to use their money in a way that is unfair to everyone else in the field. But these things can be complex, Bill, and have some unintended consequences. So what are some of the risks if the Parliament doesn't get donations reform right?
Yeah, great question. And in our submission to JSCAM last year, we flagged about 7 potential perverse outcomes that could come from these reforms. The big one that we'll get to a bit more later is that they can hurt new entrants more than incumbents.
Yep.
But there are other problems too. If you think about how you try and control spending by different entities, there are a lot more businesses in Australia than there are trade unions, for example. So if you put a limit on donations from any particular source, that leaves a lot more corporate donations available than it does union donations. Or if you limit donations to particular sources, then when the coalition is in government, they have twice as many branches that can take donations because they're 2 different political parties. The Labor Party is just one. So there are all these fiddly little questions that start to emerge. Another would be, if your party runs in the lower house and the upper house, does it get to spend twice as much money? We know that Senate campaigns often play second fiddle to House of Representative campaigns. So how do you weigh up the different spending there?
Yeah.
This time saw millions of voters decisively abandon the major parties and, as a result, transform our politics.
Big vote there with others. There seems to be a lot of vote for independence.
Turning a wave of once blue ribbon seats teal.
What we have achieved here is extraordinary. Our climate has changed.
The parties and the independents that put coal and gas and climate action on the table, and inequality and integrity went up. And I think that's a message that the next government needs to hear.
So, lots to consider, and probably why they have to issue an interim and then a full report. But Liz, speaking of some of those concerns and the risks if we get reform wrong, one of the key things that Bill just talked about is the fact that it could make it harder for challengers to come in, new independent candidates or micro parties to come in and have a genuine chance of winning. You did some research that looked at some of the advantages of being an incumbent MP. What did your research find?
Yeah, so it's really hard to win an election against a sitting MP, a senator, also known as incumbents. And part of the reason is they have a huge head start on funding. Part of being an MP or a senator is you get funding to do your job. That's great. It's
not
really
opposed to that.
No. And we think, to have proper representation up at Parliament House, I think so they should have all of the funding that they need to do their jobs. But what these spending and donation caps don't necessarily consider is the head start that those incumbents get over challengers when it comes to election time.
Yeah, and so you looked into the kind of the detail about what public funding and entitlements are available if you're a sitting MP, if you're an incumbent. And it's pretty big, right?
Yeah, it's huge. So senators get anywhere from $2.65 million over the course of a 3-year election cycle. And MPs get even more than that. It starts at $2.98 million. And that's the absolute floor. We've taken the bottom end of the range of all of the things, from everything from office expenses like printing and communications budget, mail budgets, printing signs, sending emails, having town hall meetings, and then to flights between Canberra and your home electorate, staff costs, office costs, everything in between. And it's quite staggering.
Yeah, so you get obviously a range of entitlements bill to help you perform your job as an MP and represent your electorate. So that's what things like the printing allowance and those kinds of things are for. But as Liz said, that's a big financial head start compared to if you're just some person who wants to put their hand up to run. So how much do you get a sense that JSCAM has taken this into consideration in its interim report?
There's been promising signs in JSCAM's interim report. They have flagged concerns that the Australia Institute and others have raised about this head start. And the question kind of remains about what will be done with those recommendations. If they do take into account these precautions, then maybe they can come up with a system that works. But if those are neglected in favour of implementing reforms that are superficially appealing, then we will miss out. We'll end up with a worse system.
And Liz, it's kind of a really important question for democracy as well, because obviously you don't just want the exact same people to get elected every single time just because they've got the best financial capacity. The title of this report is called The Advantages of Incumbency. How often is it that challengers beat incumbents?
Yeah, it's really hard to win against a sitting MP or senator. In the 2016 election, just 16 MPs lost to challengers, and only one of those challengers was from a micro-party, and that was Rebecca Sharkey with the Centre Alliance. Then in 2019, in the election, 8 MPs lost, and only one was to an independent, and that was Zali Steggall. And 2022 was a bit of a high watermark in terms of new independent MPs getting elected in their election. 16 MPs lost again, 6 to independents and 3 to new Greens candidates.
So it's incredibly difficult, but as you've outlined, it is possible. And at the 2022 federal election, a much bigger number of independents challenging incumbents for the first time actually got elected. So under the current rules, it is possible.
It was in 2022. A lot of those candidates were really only able to run successful campaigns because they took donations and private money. I would like to see a democracy where those candidates maybe don't need to accept so much private donations to achieve a successful campaign, or maybe where incumbents are a little bit more susceptible to a challenge in an election. But yes, at this stage, it represents a high watermark in elections of independent and micro-party candidates.
I support the recommendation of the majority report, which requires real-time disclosure of all donations above $1,000. This is a no-brainer. In my campaign last year, I disclosed every cash donation in real time. It's really not that hard. We built a website in a week that can do this.
So Climate 200 has contributed just around about $12.5 million to this campaign. Now, $12.5 million, we go back to 2019, the Coalition was about $180 million, Labor about $120 million, Clive Palmer 89, the Greens 20. So in relative terms, we are small fry, absolutely small fry. And in most of these campaigns, Climate 200 has given between 30 and 40% of the funds raised. So here I am in Kooyong right now.
At the moment, we don't have a system of public funding for elections. It's kind of a combination of public funding and accepting political donations, as all political parties do, and as Liz just explained, as the independents did, and were able to win in large numbers at the 2022 election. So as we look ahead, and JSCAM, is heading towards its next report, and we're looking at these issues, what is the balance that they have to get right?
Yeah, great question. And the promise of public funding of elections was always that it would push out private money. But what we're seeing is it really complicates things as the share of minor party and independent voters grows. Those traditional models of two major parties battling it out just no longer captures the full political ecosystem. What I hope JSCM will consider is a model that might reduce corporate influence while still leaving it open for new entrants to be properly competitive. One consideration might be restructuring public funding of elections so that it comes before the election instead of afterwards. Public funding after the fact helps minor parties and major parties build up for the next election based on their existing base of support, but it does nothing for people who are contesting for the first time, who might only contest once as well. There are models in the United States, for example, that use public funding to give private funding a boost. So you can do something like match a $200 donation several times over, but not do any more than a matching of $200 for a $2,000 donation. That suddenly changes the calculus for a candidate running for election. You can woo one major donor or a few minor donors and get an even bigger benefit. So I hope that there'll be a bit of inventiveness from the committee when they look at solving these problems and take a look overseas as well to see how these have been addressed elsewhere.
The other thing about providing funding after the fact as opposed to before the fact is that you build in a time lag. You make it so that elections subsequent to when a vote was happened are influenced by the votes of the previous election, and then you don't represent the political will of the Australian public as accurately as you would if it was before the election.
As well as laws banning false information in campaign advertisements, the government is understood to support the recommendations put forward by an independent committee. There are also talks of implementing a public funding system which could see taxpayers foot more of the cost of running elections.
I want to come to some of the other things that JSCM considered, including truth in political advertising and other reforms. Apart from donations, what were they looking into?
It's been really promising to have JSCM come in with full force behind truth in political advertising laws. It's something that the Australia Institute's been talking about for years, as we see each federal election bedevilled by more claims of misinformation than the one coming before it. And we have a working model in Australia, the South Australian truth in political advertising laws. And JSCM gave its endorsement to adopting those laws at the federal level as well. That's an endorsement that comes with the support of Labor, the Greens and some of the independents, but not the coalition. That's different to in the ACT, where we got tripartisan support behind these laws, and I still hope they can be won over. But those laws would make a real difference to the quality of the debate. JSCM's also given some serious thought to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voters, which is another thing that the Australia Institute flagged in our submission. It's difficult to run elections in remote areas, which are overrepresented with Aboriginal people, but that's no excuse for not doing it. We have compulsory voting, we have universal franchise. We really need to make sure that everyone gets a chance to cast their vote. We're also going to see in JSCM's final report a consideration of increasing the number of parliamentarians. Australia's population's increased by 10 million people since the last increase in parliamentarians, which means they're all more thinly stretched across more people than ever before. And it's particularly an acute problem for the territories who miss out on senators, whereas a small state like Tasmania gets 12, the ACT and the NT only get 2 each.
Not exactly something that the public is clamouring for, though, is it? Additional MPs, Bill?
Unfortunately not. Australia Institute polling finds that it tends to be unpopular. But I think if someone were to make the case and explain the benefits that can come, as well as the fact that it makes it easier to vote out your local MP if you're not happy with them, you might be able to win people over.
Yeah. And Liz, coming back to the advantages of incumbency, obviously all of these reforms and the research that you've done is in the interest of strengthening our democracy. And democracies work best when they're kind of vibrant and thriving, and when, I guess, it's a fair playing field for everyone. So is that the real thing that I guess we have to worry about with potential reforms, that we want to protect and enhance that vibrancy? We don't kind of want to put up barriers so that only people who are already in the tent are the ones who are going to get elected in future.
Absolutely. As we sort of see, as Bill mentioned, the primary vote for the major parties is dropping over time. Australians are voting increasingly beyond the two-party binary for those minor and micro party candidates and independents. And our political system should be able to hold those candidates and those representatives in a way that is reflective of the public sentiment, not just of a political system that was designed ages ago when those two parties had stronger foothold in
really
the public.
dominant.
Yeah, and let's not forget these advantages of incumbency are designed by the incumbents. And so it's our job as the public and as a community to keep an eye on how those are affecting the political system and the outcome of elections.
With around $2 million gifted to both of the big parties by the fossil fuel companies and their cheerleaders, it's little wonder that no matter who is in government, the fossil fuel sector continues to get almost $11 billion in public subsidies every year in things like cheap fuel and accelerated depreciation, plus direct grants to open up new polluting projects.
And Bill, it's, I guess, just important overall to have challenges to this system and the ability for people to come in and run for Parliament and have a decent chance of getting elected. It's kind of no different to competition policy in the private sector. You always want to try and make an equal playing field for companies to compete on other things, like in this instance, we'd be talking kind of about public policy being what's in contest, not just, who's got the biggest war chest.
Exactly. You want to make sure that democracy is accessible for people, both within the party system and outside of it, and that people can have a crack at running for politics, build up support in their electorate, and have a serious chance of winning. That also means not just that we want independent challengers, but that we want independent challengers without existing name recognition to have a go as well. There's a danger if you bring in spending caps that it looks appealing to go with an independent candidate with an existing high level of name recognition, but not necessarily one who'd need to build up that recognition over time. In general, we see that democracies that have a thriving and heated challenge in the political arena are the more successful and vibrant ones. And we want to keep that for Australia as well.
And as Liz said, we've seen this trend where there's been a decline in the major party vote over time. We've got now two very well entrenched minor parties in the Nationals and the Greens, a whole range of more micro parties, and now a huge host of independents. But as you said, it's not just candidates, it's also kind of new political parties that should be able to come in, as new issues arise and things as well.
That's right. And you can look to the Australian Senate as an example of the benefits that come from having multiple different voices represented. Having a crossbench that can raise different issues means that you hear different discussions and different voices to what you would if there were just two major parties battling it out. And that's been true for the Senate for decades now. Democratic Labor Party, the Democrats, the Greens, micro parties now. It's kind of been proving this model, and it's not a surprise, I think, that you see that minor party and independent vote growing first in the Senate and then following behind in the House of Representatives as well.
Well, thanks. We might wrap it up there.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks to Bill and Liz. This episode was recorded on Friday, the 23rd of June 2023, and things may have changed since recording. If you liked today's episode, please rate and review us. It helps other people to find the show. And if you love the show and want to help Follow the Money continue to do work with impact and support the Australia Institute to continue having influence, please consider supporting us with a small tax-deductible gift today at australiainstitute.org.au. That's also where you will find the advantages of Incumbency Report and our submission to JSCAM, along with all our latest research and content. And we're on Twitter at the Oz Institute with an AUS. My Twitter handle is Ebony_Bennett with a double N double T. Bill Brown is at Brown90, that's Brown with an E. And Liz Morrison is at Morrison_Liz, that's Morrison with one R. Our producer Jennifer Macy is at Jennifer Macy. Our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. Thanks for listening.